Welcome to Freedom to Learn, the podcast that champions choice in education, defends parental rights, and exposes the harm caused by school unions. I'm Jenny Gentles, Director of Education Freedom and Parental Rights at DFI, the Defense of Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act signed by the President on July 4th includes a new federal K-12 scholarship tax credit that could expand education freedom nationwide. Starting in 2027, individual taxpayers can receive a dollar-for-dollar federal tax credit for contributions to K-12 scholarship granting organizations. Qualified families can use scholarship funds for tuition, tutoring, special needs services, education technology, books, and more. The tax credit is the result of years of work by education freedom champions. One of those behind-the-scenes champions joins us today to talk through the nuts and bolts of the new federal school choice provision. John Schilling's a senior advisor with DFI Action and American Federation for Children. He's a longtime school choice advocate, and he previously served at the Arizona Department of Education, the Republican National Committee, and in congressional offices. John Schilling, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
It is great to be here with you.
Well, John, I'm not going to pretend that I don't know you or that we haven't worked together for many, many years. We met so long ago, back when I was working in the Bush administration at the Department of Education, and you were making sure that the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program was receiving the attention that it deserved. And now we're having a conversation about a federal school choice option that is of a very different scope than the DC OSP program.
Though, unlike you, I am still working on the DCOSP too.
Happy to support those efforts. That's a program that definitely deserves attention on the Hill. The families of DC deserve options. But you've been working on ensuring that families nationwide have educational options, and you've been working on the I don't know what we're calling it now, the federal scholarship tax credit, the federal school choice tax credit. So in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that the president signed on July 4th, there was a 100% non-refundable scholarship tax credit that is permanent and uncapped, and it's now part of the federal tax code. So tell us what it's actually called so we can know what to call it, and tell us what this means.
Well, you clearly did not bury the lead, because the big win in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for school choice supporters is this 100% non-refundable federal scholarship tax credit that is permanent and uncapped. We are really excited about this. You mentioned somewhat jokingly, I think, that I've been working on this for a long time. I have literally been working on this for 8 years. Really longer than that. If you think about the very first federal scholarship tax credit was introduced by Senator Marco Rubio in 2013. But we never really got traction on this until Betsy DeVos became Secretary of Education. And the work that Betsy and her team did in the first Trump administration to lay the groundwork for this, and indeed the work and the support that she and her team continue to provide throughout this process, was absolutely crucial to getting it done. But I'm very excited about it. I will say it is not exactly what we wanted. There are things in here that I don't like. There are things in here that our supporters don't like, and I'm happy to go through those.
Yeah, so let's make sure we talk about what we like, what we don't like. We'll talk a little bit about how the sausage was made. But again, John, what do we call it? We were calling it the Educational Choice for Children Act, ECCA, in earlier conversations on this podcast. But what ended up in the tax credit kind of morphed into its own thing. So federal scholarship tax credit?
Yeah, so I think the best way to describe it is as a federal scholarship tax credit. And we went through a very interesting process. The Educational Choice for Children Act was the original bill that was introduced in June of 2022, so literally just over 3 years ago. And the sponsors of that bill were Senator Bill Cassidy and Tim Scott in the Senate. Over on the House side, our original sponsor was former Representative Jackie Walorski, who was tragically killed in an automobile accident that summer. And the bill was then picked up by Congressman Adrian Smith, who was a senior member of the Ways and Means Committee, aided brilliantly by Congressman Burgess Owens of Utah, who She's been a tremendous champion on this all the way through. And then, just about probably a month or so ago, Senator Ted Cruz introduced something called the Universal School Choice Act, which made two substantial changes to the ECCA. And those changes were to make it universal with a means preference, very similar to what was passed in Texas earlier this year, and to change the allocation formula from what was first come, first serve to a formula that was based on the K-12 population in every state. So we sort of went through a little bit of that down the stretch, but in the end, as you pointed out, it sort of morphed into its own thing, thanks to the Senate parliamentarian more than anybody else.
Right. Not the most popular person in Washington, D.C.
No, and not the most popular person among both moderates and conservatives. And I think as Republicans look at, and I wasn't following every piece of the big beautiful bill closely, but I followed enough of it to know that there were a lot of unhappy Republicans, based on what she was keeping and striking as part of the big beautiful bill. And and that some of the, and none of us are Senate parliamentarians. It's a sort of it's an odd process, but for those of for the folks in your audience who are unfamiliar with the reconciliation process, a reconciliation bill can happen anytime one party controls the White House, the House, and the Senate. So both parties have used this tool. Biden used it twice to pass the American Rescue Plan in early 2021. And then the following year, he used it to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. Neither one of those bills had any Republican votes, just as the big, beautiful bill did not have any Democrat votes. But in order for something to be considered or allowable in reconciliation, it has to have something to do with spending, debt, or revenue. But I'll just take, our federal scholarship tax credit and look at, what was done to that during the process. And I got to tell you, some of us are a little mystified, as to some of the things that were taken out, which were very disappointing.
Let's start with what was put in. So again, this is 100%, meaning dollar for dollar scholarship tax credit. It's permanent and uncapped, meaning it doesn't sunset after a certain number of years. Uncapped means that it's the aggregate cap. That it's not like there's a set amount like 4 billion or 5 billion or 10 billion, and then the credits are no longer allowable. It's uncapped, but there are certain amounts that the individual can get a tax credit for. So, do we want to get
Yeah.
into that a little bit?
Yeah. So obviously the great big win here is getting 100% non-refundable tax credit that is permanent and uncapped into the federal tax code. I do not want to minimize just how big a win this is, because this clearly gives us something that we can build on going forward. Getting this embedded in the tax code was a huge win for us. But what they did do is they capped the amount that an individual donor is able to give to a scholarship granting organization at $1,700. Now, if you're trying to do the math on this, think about the ECCA. The original ECCA was $10 billion annually over 10 years. If we're going to try to raise $10 billion and the maximum amount that a donor can give to an SGO is $1,700, my math may be off here, but I think we're going to need about 6 million donors. That's going to be really hard. The other problematic thing that she insisted on was that there had to be a state opt-in. Now, again, I don't know what the parliamentarian has to do with determining, with requiring that a state must opt in to this, because to me that's policy, and I just don't know why that was something that she insisted on. But I will tell you, Ginny, we about 10 days ago we were dead in the water. This thing was over, and our opponents were sending out gloating press releases that school choice had been stripped from the big beautiful bill.
And who are those opponents, John?
Well, so these are probably the most vocal one nowadays seems to be a guy named Josh Cowan, who is a professor at Michigan State University. I don't want to get over my skis here, but I'm pretty sure he's funded by the teachers unions.
Oh, he just received an award from the National Education Association, the NEA, for his opposition
Yeah, he's their guy.
to school choice. Yeah,
He's their guy,
yeah.
and so Josh is out there lamenting that this bill will be bad for private schools, leaving the impression that he and the teachers unions are deeply concerned about America's private schools. I think some of us have a hard time swallowing that, but but that is his position. So
Well, okay, so let's talk about the mechanics of how
yeah,
this will work a little bit. You threw out some terms that folks may or may not be familiar with. Scholarship granting organization. So again, an
yeah,
individual can give up to $1,700 to a scholarship granting organization and then get a dollar for dollar federal tax credit for that contribution.
yeah.
And that scholarship granting organization, the SGO, then can award a scholarship to eligible families. So we haven't even gotten to the private schools yet. Let's stop there though with the awards to the families. What is an eligible family under this provision, and how does the SGO have a relationship with them?
I would say that the structure of the federal scholarship tax credit really is a slimmed down educational choice for children act. So it still has the same eligible uses, the same income threshold. So the income threshold is 300% of median income by area. And we originally came up with that income threshold because it reflects the different cost of living around the country. It also would capture about 85 to 90% of the K-12 kids in every state. So we used to refer to this as a near universal bill. The eligible uses remain the same. The way that the bill was written, in the end, it's linked to Section 530B. So the eligible uses include things like tuition, tutoring, education technology, special needs services, curriculum materials, even transportation, because the 530B section has broader eligible uses than the 529 section. Uh,
And that section that you're referring to is a longstanding
yes,
existing section related to Coverdell?
Coverdell accounts. Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. And the uses are broader. I mentioned a minute ago that we really were dead in the water about 10 days ago. And the person who really, I think, came in at the end and kind of saved us was Senator Ted Cruz.
Mm.
He decided that he was going to go and argue with the parliamentarian. And basically, Senator Cruz and his team, uh, working with other members of the Senate Finance Committee, because Cruz is not a member of the Senate Finance Committee, but he had success previously arguing with the parliamentarian. And so he and his team, basically tried to come up with something that was going to get by her, given what they knew her very limited parameters of this were going to be. And ultimately the rewritten product, while it is essentially an ECCA structure, it is in fact different, because of what we had to do in order to get the parliamentarians' approval. And in addition to the hard cap of $1,700 per donor, the parliamentarian also insisted on the state opt in. And that is particularly uh, disturbing for us because what we wanted out of both the ECCA and the Universal School Choice Act was to make sure that students in every state were going to be able to benefit from this. And if you are now going to require states to opt in, I mean, it stands to reason that you're likely to get some red states, probably most red states that will opt in, and blue states that probably won't opt in.
Well, we have about 35 states that have educational savings accounts, ESAs, or tax credit scholarship programs, or the old fashioned voucher programs. When you're saying that they will opt in, what is the benefit of them opting in to having a federal tax credit as well?
What we always advertised for both the ECCA and even the Universal School Choice Act was that if you were a red state, if you lived in a state where there was already some level of private school choice, this was additive because what we were doing at the federal level could be stacked on top of what states were offering. So, in so doing, you were increasing purchasing power for parents and you were helping more kids. It remains a huge benefit for red states. And I'll give you an example. In a lot of states that have private school choice programs, particularly tax credit scholarship states, they have very low scholarship amounts. So the average tax credit scholarship, I'd have to go back to EdChoice or AFC and check the research on this, but it's probably around $3,000. The scholarship amount for ESAs typically higher, $7,000, $8,000 a year, sometimes $10,000 a year. But in tax credit scholarship states in particular, that scholarship amount is very low. So the federal scholarship coming in on top of that is really going to be very beneficial for parents who are sending their children to K-12 private schools, but it will be really beneficial for parents who want to continue with private education into high school because the high school tuition is a lot higher. So having that federal scholarship on top of it is going to be hugely beneficial for parents in red states.
Well, and the allowable uses. So again, there's the tax credit for the individual contributing, then the scholarship granting organization gives the scholarship funds to the eligible families. We've talked about what eligibility means. The participating families can use these funds for the Coverdale approved eligible uses, and those include tuition as well as the other things that you mentioned. So homeschooling families can benefit from this as well, right?
So there seems to be some question about this. Our intent with the ECCA and the Universal School Choice Act was always to ensure that homeschool families can benefit. There seems to be some question about whether this rewritten version that landed in the One Big Beautiful Bill will indeed allow homeschool families to participate. We're going to try very hard to make sure that they can, because that was the intent all along. And that actually raises something that I did want to bring up. So, a big part of ultimately implementing this is going to be the rulemaking process, which will be done by the Department of the Treasury. And one of the things that we learned back in 2017 when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed. Mind you, we did not get school choice into the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, though we did get the big 529 expansion. So families with 529s could use their 529s for K-12 tuition. But
Another issue that was important to Senator Cruz.
a very important issue that was, that's his deal. And by the way, before I go into that, one thing that was in the big beautiful bill that didn't get a lot of attention was Senator Cruz managed to get that double.
Yeah. From 10,000 to 20,000?
20,000. That's a huge deal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Our opponents aren't talking about that, but that's a really big deal. But after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed in 2017, the Treasury Department issued a number of rules to implement that bill. A draft rule that came out would have had the effect of debilitating state tax credit scholarship programs all over the country. Now, this was not done purposely or in any nefarious way. It was just kind of done out of ignorance. When I was at AFC, we literally spent a year, trying to get these rules corrected to make sure that they were not going to negatively affect state tax credit scholarship programs. And the reason I bring this up is because we certainly learned from that. And this time, we are going to work with our coalition allies around the country, scholarship granting organization experts, and we're going to get together and we're going to try to come up with some kind of a guidance document that we can give to the Treasury Department as they consider how to write rules around this. That's going to be really important.
Yeah, and just to restate what you're saying. This is not an education program. This is not a new federal education program that will be regulated and controlled by the US Department of Education. This is a new federal tax credit,
Correct.
and Treasury has jurisdiction over it. And any rules and regulations will be drafted and implemented by the Department of Treasury.
Yeah, that's correct, and that is by design. And one of the questions that I've gotten asked frequently, particularly since the 2024 election, is, what does the federal scholarship tax credit have to do with abolishing the Department of Education? And if the Department of Education goes away, doesn't all that quote funding for the tax credit go away? Well, no, they have nothing to do with each other, because the beauty of this federal scholarship tax credit is it is funded by private donations. So it is individuals. We had hoped it would be individuals and corporations, but it ended up just being individuals. So in essence, what this is, Ginny, it's added money, right? I mean, so you get all of our opponents screaming that this is draining money from public schools. The reality is it's actually adding money to K-12 education around the country.
Right, screaming about draining money and somehow funding billionaires or supporting billionaires or something, and you think, like, I don't know that scholarships of this scope are gonna make a difference to any wealthy person. Like, that's not who this is for.
No.
These are for families who just need that extra little bump to make high school happen, to make private high school happen, like you said, to make sure multiple kids in their family can go to a faith-based school, which, they're not that expensive, but sometimes those families need those extra dollars, that extra financial bump in order to make it work.
Yeah, and this is why I find arguments from people like Josh Cohen so annoying, and obviously I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here, but those of us in the school choice movement have always believed that what this is about is ensuring that every child in America has access to a great education.
Yeah.
We're not against the public school down the street, right? I mean, we're not against public schools. We just want parents to be in the driver's seat so that they can choose the best educational options for their own kids. That's what we want. And and look, the reality is most of the kids in K 12 are going to remain in public schools. We just want to make sure that we're creating as many options as possible, whether those be options to go to a private school, a charter school, a micro school, a homeschool, a magnet school. We just want to create a lot of options for kids so that parents can make the best choices for their own kids. That's just good for kids, period.
Absolutely, and that message did get lost on the Hill sometimes, I guess, a couple weeks ago when you said you were dead in the water. It's not just the unions. It's not just the Josh Cowens of the world. There's also an organization, I think it's AASA, the School Superintendents Association. They've worked with those groups. They've worked with the unions to come up with this like coalition, which isn't really a broad-based coalition. It's just the unions and the superintendents association saying that they don't want families to have options. They don't want to expand opportunities. They don't want families to have choices. They want to ensure that they stay in their residentially assigned public school, which just seems like a really strange message. But somehow it's very powerful on Capitol Hill.
It is, and that's great for the adults. But
Sure.
if what we're for is really trying to ensure that every child has access to a great education, this has to be about what's best for the kids, and not what's best for the adults.
The
And
adults working in the system. Education's not a jobs program. It has a different it has a different mission, and sometimes that gets lost.
look, I mean, you and I follow NAEP scores pretty closely. I think it's abundantly clear. We can do a lot better. I mean, when you're at the point where you've got more than 30% of the kids that are scoring below below basic level,
Yeah.
it's a cute way of not saying failing, but that's what it is. And when you're scoring at the below basic level, that is failing. And when you have less than 40% of the fourth and eighth graders that are proficient in reading and math, we are not doing the job here, right? And we've got study after study after study. EdChoice has done a great job of compiling all these studies that show the existence of choice in a state also has the effect of helping the surrounding public schools do better.
Right.
Why isn't everybody for this?
Yeah, the school choice, I think it's 1, 2, 3s by EdChoice. Highly recommend that resource that shows all kinds of different studies and the benefits. It's a very honest report. It shows that the studies that don't show the benefits, but the vast majority are benefiting both public and private students, and ensure educational outcomes are very different for the participants than those who didn't participate. So, highly recommend that resource. All right, John. So let's talk about next steps as
Yeah.
we wrap up. You mentioned regulations,
Yes.
um, but you did at the outset say that there were some things in there that you weren't happy about. I would imagine that $1,700 cap contribution limit is a source of some frustration. You mentioned the opt in, the fact that states can't just automatically participate. The scholarship granting organizations can't just automatically start awarding scholarships in states. The state leadership has to opt in. Is there anything that can be done on those fronts?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, we will do whatever we can in the rulemaking process to make this as efficient as possible. The start date for this is January 1st, 2027. The speaker has indicated that he intends to do two more reconciliation bills. He has indicated that one would be in the fall of this year and one would be in the spring of next year. Um, we're going to try very hard to get this thing amped up and to get it to get it to be more robust in one of these future reconciliation bills. And our job as advocates is going to be to get back up on the hill, get our folks, our champions energized, to be able to do that. And I want to mention a few of those champions, and I want to start with Mike Johnson, the speaker, huge school choice supporter. He's been a tremendous champion all the way through. Majority Leader John Thune really leaned in hard to try to make sure that this was going to be in the Senate reconciliation bill. I mentioned Senator Cruz and his role in all this. He has been a leading school choice champion in the Senate for many, many years. Senator Tim Scott, Senator Bill Cassidy, Senator Steve Daines. These folks were really, really strong in pushing for this. I mentioned Adrian Smith over on the House side, our House sponsor, Congressman Jordan, Congressman Donalds, Congressman Burgess Owens, who has just been relentless in promoting this, and this is what we want, because the Republicans, most of the Republicans in Congress, really understand what this is about. This is about making sure that every child in America has educational opportunity.
I wanted to throw in Congresswoman Elise Stefanik on the list there too. There was a press conference a month or so ago when the uh, ECCA
Yeah,
was passed out of Ways and Means, and so she was present for that. And then also,
and think about Elise. Elise may very well run for the governor to be governor of New York. I guarantee you that Elise Stefanik is going to be talking about this when if she runs for governor, because the student K-12 students in New York, they desperately need this, and I'm sure that she will make a point of raising this.
yeah, also want to mention Congresswoman Virginia Fox, who was the chair of the Education Workforce Committee, which again does not have jurisdiction. This is a tax provision, but she has been a strong supporter of school choice, and I appreciate that
Very
about
strong
her.
supporter, and Virginia, as you know, she is the chairman of the House Rules Committee. She sits in a very important spot for doing the right thing in Congress.
Yeah. All right, John, I would imagine you heard a school choice myth or two over the last 6 months during the big push for the budget reconciliation bill, and certainly over the last 8 years as you've been working on this tax credit. What's the one that bothers you the most and that you'd want to tackle today as we wrap up?
I Probably the one that's top of mind right now is is our buddy Josh Cohen, suggesting
He's
that.
getting too much airtime
I
here.
mean, but this is being picked up by media
Yeah.
outlets.
Yeah.
It's being advanced by the teachers
Yeah.
unions. It's kind of blowing up on social media. This suggestion that the inclusion of this federal scholarship tax credit is somehow going to be bad for private schools in America. That is simply false. That is just not true. The bill is, very specifically written, where scholarship granting organizations are in the driver's seat. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that prevents a scholarship granting organization from issuing a scholarship to a family to attend a private or faith-based school, in any state that opts in. So that's probably the thing that bothers me most at the moment. Um, but look, Ginny, as we talked about earlier, at the end of the day, what this is really about is a very different approach to education in America. And those of us who believe in education freedom simply believe that parents have the right, to send their children to whatever school works best for them. And yet you have the whole education establishment. The largest funder of the Democratic Party is the teachers union. I don't want to be partisan about this, but that is a fact. And the teachers unions in America do not like school choice. They do not want to empower parents. And I would remind everybody, go to YouTube and Google Bob Shannon, National Education Association, the famous speech many years ago, where he basically said, "We don't care about kids. We're for the adults."
Yeah.
That's the difference. We're here fighting for the kids, and they're out there fighting for the adults in the system. That's the difference.
Well, John, thank you for fighting for the kids, and thank you for your commitment to education freedom. And thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Thank you for having me.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. You can learn more about DFI at dfipolicy.org. If you have feedback or suggestions for future podcasts, please reach out to us at podcast@dfipolicy.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.